To me, it's not really so much just a platform question, right? That do you start with Facebook? Do you start with social? I mean, what is it? I think it's more about in the early days, really understanding who your target users are, right? And then finding them on various platforms becomes easier, right? You could find them on social, you could find them on mobile, you could find them even in offline channels, right? But really understanding that who is my target audience or users that I want to reach out is critical in the early days, right?
How do you know who your target audience is early on without doing?
I mean, you test, you pilot, right? In the early days, you pilot, you see where you're getting your users from. I
so
agree.
He's asking you where you piloted. So where do you pilot?
You start small, right? I mean, if you launch a game, you don't really need to decide where you launch.
With?
So why don't you help answer that?
Catfight.
I'm just curious because he asked a pretty straightforward question. He said, how do you try it? Do you start with a DSP? Do you start with an ad network? Do you start with a social platform? Do you start with Facebook? Do you start with something like that? Your answer to that was, you should do a pilot test. So you basically answered it with his question. So I'm just curious, are you going to say that it's
My answer to that was to figure out your audience first. For that, you do the pilot.
I agree with her to some extent. Although I'm a moderator here, we need to bring some sanity back. I think it's good to start to know your consumer, but I think the bigger question is also, sometimes not the budgets are not there to kind of go whole hog, right? So probably do you start small and then scale over time, and maybe there are technologies like Vijay can throw some light, which actually helps you retain customers better, which is a better way of marketing than just going out for looking for new users. So again, I'll just go back.
So I sort of have a contrarian view. I think, especially, I mean, for new apps is one thing, but in general, I think if you have the right kind of product, if you have the right kind of scale for that particular product, then word of mouth will actually take you a long way in the early days.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So the question you asked was, how do you start marketing, right? How do you do a pilot test? So you don't do a pilot test by pilot testing. You do a pilot test by trying to build a game and doing everything you can for free first. So word of mouth, I think, is hyper important. Work your network as much as you can. So we just had Spiel Games up here saying, talk to some publishers. Early on when you're first releasing your game, it's not always a bad thing to work with a publisher, but you might want to try reaching out to them, reaching out to some journalists, maybe talking to some bloggers, doing some stuff like this, working your own internal network and trying to get people to start playing it. And then with that, using your analytics tools, then you understand who are my target audience, who are my target users, and then you keep building on that pilot there.
I'd like to add to that, actually. It's a precursor to marketing is actually making sure you have the right technologies in place. And so one of the things to do is make sure you have an attribution tracking system in place. So if you're not using something like an AppsFlyer or a Kachava or an AdX or a Tune, you should be thinking about putting that in your game early, because that's how you're going to find out which of your platforms. Once you talk to people, once you have word of mouth marketing in place, and you know kind of whether your game is going to work or not, and you're out there and you're trying to experiment with budgets everywhere, you want to be able to make sure that you know which channels are actually producing for you or not. So something to think about.
And actually, this is more for you, Asta, because you run the India business for InMobi, right? A lot of these people, I think, here are not targeting the global market. I know Reliance, we do a lot of games for the global market, so naturally we have to target the global consumer. But in the Indian market, do you see things working better? For example, do you see maybe video ads working better to get users? I know that those costlier were options, but across interstitials, video, some of those different channels available, do you see things giving more traction to begin with, and then what actually helps you scale in the domestic market?
So I think if we look at just ad formats, right? So I think traditionally, of course, banner and interstitials were there and prevalent throughout, but increasingly, I think especially for games, right, rewarded videos work really well because there is some element of user opt-in, right? When the user is actually seeing the ad, there is an element of user opt-in and intent to see the ad, right? So, of course, the conversion rates typically that we see on rewarded videos are much higher than the traditional ad formats where we saw, banners or interstitials. Another ad format which is working well, of course, is also now native, right? But native ad experiences, what at least we've seen is that a lot of non-gaming segments like to spend on native advertising. We've at least not seen a lot of gaming advertisers spending yet on native advertising. It's a more brand-centric, e-commerce, those kind of guys who are spending on native advertising. But rewarded videos definitely show high CVRs, I mean high conversion rates, and even user quality.
Sure, and I think this is leading me to the next question of how much money are we talking about here, which is what some people I'm sure will have a question in their mind. Are we talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, or are we talking about like $1,000 budget to start with, especially for some of the indie community here, who want to get started and get a few thousand users. So that question is to both of you guys. Do you think like a 5K, 10K, 1K, what is the right kind of budget for somebody to actually start out a marketing program in case, after doing the basic community building and the PR, the organics that, you mentioned?
Well, I mean, I think it depends a lot on what you're trying to get out of that initial budget, right? Are you trying to test serverless? We talked about that just a panel ago. In the Philippines, you can get 10,000 users for $1,000. But are they going to spend money? Probably not. Are they going to teach you how to use your game and what to do with your game? Yeah. But some of the things we haven't talked about is App Store optimization, SEO, that sort of thing, right? You can get a lot out of that for very little spend. And I think that's pretty heavily turned an eye on. But honestly, you're not going to spend $1,000 and grow a user base. It's just, as much as we want to see that, it's not going to happen. But if you have, again, the right tracking tools in place and you get some early indicators, then you can build on that, right? So for $2,000, we can start seeing, yes, this channel's working. Okay. And if it's at least close to ROI positive, then it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it because you're starting to get cash back. But you can get learnings. You're not going to build a game from it, but you're going to get learnings from it.
So I'll actually ask the audience a question here. So how many of you sitting here actually have a budget of more than $5,000 a month in marketing? Can I see a show of hands?
How many have more than $5,000 for the year? You better quit it, Dilpesh. You get 5,000 users a minute.
Okay, so that gives a sense of the fact that people are not spending too much money in our market, which is fine, because I think people are experimenting as they go along, right? And I'll bring you, Vijay, into this conversation. Because you've been working with the ecosystem quite a bit in India and abroad. Have you seen things working from technology which actually can assist in marketing, besides spending money out there, right?
Yeah, I think I echo what Andrew was saying. Analytics is the key thing. I think what we have seen is that most of our customers, especially, they use the analytic tools. They know where the trends are, where actually things are actually moving forward. They know what time of the day they're using it. So those kind of patterns actually help tell where you want to focus on, rather than just the marketing part. Especially if you have just $1,000 and less, I would rather spend that money understanding your own data patterns than going into the market.
Right, and Raj, if I could bring you into the conversation, you guys have lots of tools here, and I think, as far as I understand, starting from basic to loyalty marketing, to some of those kind of cool things which people should explore, and probably we are not doing enough of it in India, because India, I don't know how much loyalty is towards a particular app. The retention rates in India are pretty poor. The uninstall rates are really high if you look at the Indian market, right, for multiple reasons. So, have you seen things work here, which actually Indian developers should be trying, which we are not trying right now?
We've seen all sorts of experiments being run in India in terms of loyalty. Most of the stuff right now is largely incentivized installs. You've seen a lot of these mobile apps show up in India where they're largely just kind of showing an offer wall of incentivized installs. So you see the free charges and the Paytms on the list. I think it's early days. I think one of the solutions that we're trying to think about is kind of creating some kind of coalition program for indie developers to bind together and kind of think about helping each other kind of combat the big AAA titles that are out there. And I think loyalty is one of the ways you can do that. If you're playing a game that actually has some kind of currency that you can also earn somewhere else, and you can spend in another game, cross promote those games. It's an interesting idea, and it's kind of the basis for our business. And it's early days and we're still figuring it out, but it is kind of the things that we're thinking about. Is how do we get the long tail of games that are out there to be able to participate in the forum? Because when we were out there and we were buying installs at places like Facebook, we spent millions of dollars on installs, and at the end of the day, it's just it's very pockmarked. You really don't know where your best users are, even if you do have the analytics, and it's really challenging. Facebook for us is a tried and tested tool, but it's also very expensive, and you have to have again tens. If you were to ask me, kind of point blank what the budget should be, with thousands of dollars, you're really not going to find the answer. But then, as Andrew alluded to, learning is more important than going out there and spending money on your installs is where we go, and really kind of amping it up. Today, for example, we don't really buy installs anymore. Whether we're not in a kind of an aggressive state right now, where we're going to buy. But what we've learned over the last kind of couple of years buying installs is that learning your channels is really important, and figuring out kind of what your users your whales are versus the ones that are here, and understanding your own app as well. Are you trying to build an app that you want to have users stick around for a long time, or are you building an app that you want to see users stick around for 5 minutes and go click on an ad or a rewarded video ad and go somewhere else? Because you really crave the high CPMs and really low engagement because it's the kind of app you have. And that's a kind of roundabout answer, but I just wanted to throw my ideas out there.
Yeah, that what you said would be fantastic. If we can do that to the community here, that'd be fantastic. And coming over to you, Ustad, I think the next question that comes to my mind, you actually saw the audience spend levels pretty much, right, in terms of where they are today. So if they were to come to you as a product head for InMobi and ask you a question, should I look for volume or value? Because in India we love downloads. I think we love talking to our friends saying that, okay, my game has 5 million downloads this month, or I've got 10,000 downloads this month. If I talk to most of the indie developers here today, they're just going to be really happy if they get 1 million downloads in the next 6 months, not even a month, right?
I think most people are really happy with 1 million downloads in 6 months.
Yeah.
Just to throw that out there.
Yeah, so if they were to come to you, and given the kind of level of maturity and spends and stuff, where do you think you would talk to them? Will you advise them about value of installs or the actual volume of installs?
So, Rupak, I think I would echo again what has already been discussed, right? I think last year, at least what we saw, especially in India, there was a huge sort of euphoria around just volume, right? So people were going after huge number of incentivized installs, spending whether it was $1,000 or $50,000 and just getting volume, right? But I don't think that's panned out for people, because typically those kind of installs have 99.5% install rates. I mean, that's just what I've heard. So I would recommend value, right? Especially if you have small budgets, spend that on learning on, having the right attribution tracking partner, the right analytics tools, so you can at least spend that budget on understanding, and then see which channel or which platform you want to take to scale once you have more budgets. So my recommendation would definitely not be volume.
Yeah, I also would have mentioned that this is probably a term you've heard before, but it's almost often ignored over the long term, which is focusing on your ARPDAU. You have to focus on your average revenue per daily active user. That's a very important aspect to know whether or not you're going to end up break even or cash flow positive on your user base, and then and help you decide whether you want to pour more budget into your ad spend. So just keep that in mind is important.
I wanted to bring up a comment about volume versus quality. In early days markets, generally it's always been burst volume, right? In the U.S., which is considered the top mobile market, right? The BL market. Back in the day, it was all volume oriented, right? And then you learn from it, right? India is catching up very quickly, but it was a few steps behind, just like APAC was. We opened an office in Korea 2.5 years ago. They didn't even have tracking. They didn't do CPI. They only wanted to do CPC. They wanted to do incent. So in early days of markets, the idea is we need installs, right? But what I want to throw back to you guys is this. We've talked a lot about building for the Indian market and marketing for the Indian market. And I think all of us would agree in this room that you don't want to make a game that's just for India. You want to make a game that's for the world. You want to make a game that everyone wants to play, right? I think all of us have pretty high hopes. So when we're talking about this, let's not just talk about how do I do well in India. Let's talk about how do I do well around the world. And let's try to put that side on it. So that being said, it is about quality. It's about users. It's about knowing the audience, not just here. It's about knowing the audience in the US, in Europe, in Asia. And I think that's that mind shift, that focus on we want to be the best that we can possibly be, I think will help elevate the overall market in a big way.
I'll just add one thing to that. I think understanding it and taking it global is actually necessary, but I also think that it probably needs to be segmented based on cultures and things of that nature. For example, if it's India, I think there are a bunch of countries around India which all have similar cultures, and they will actually look at it in a same way, right? compared to what happens in the West.
I'll actually ask the audience another question here. I think the panelists mentioned quite a bit about analytics, and I think the value of analytics in marketing, because it's just not enough buying users. So, how many of us sitting here leverage anything beyond the Google Analytics for the apps? Can I have a show of hands if anybody's using something beyond? Okay, that's again probably 10% of the audience. So probably I'm assuming that lots of the others are either not using analytics or they're using some form of Google Analytics for your mobile app. So again, I think the question again, for all the folks in this room, in this panel is, if somebody's building for India, I'm not going for building for the world, because the complications in terms of devices, optimization, all of those things comes into picture. But even for building for India, is there a market which kind of replicates the Indian market in user behavior, which they should look at? For example, if I'm finding getting 5,000 Indian users to be of high quality to be much costlier, should I look at a market like Sri Lanka and Indonesia or some of the other markets which probably replicate? For example, we see that it's actually quite good to test your monetization in Canada, for example. I think that was something that was mentioned a little while ago in the whale panel, right? That Canada replicates some of the good user behavior. So for an Indian game company or a small indie developer, are there markets which kind of could simulate a possible Indian experience besides the Indian market?
What we've seen at least is, I think Southeast Asia could be a close one, right? But like it was being earlier discussed, there's still a lot of nuances, especially if you're trying to build an Indian-centric game, because there are also certain themes which work well in India which are not even, say, relevant in Southeast Asia, right? For example, things like the madness around cricket, or for that matter, Hindi movies, or Bollywood. Those kind of things don't even get mimicked in some of the countries in Southeast Asia. So it's a tricky one. But yeah, if it's a more generic game, casual game, maybe not based on some of these themes, then Southeast Asia could be a good representation.
Can I bring up a quick note? So I know we're talking about localization and building things for specific markets, and I know I'm being a bit of a contrarian, but I like to keep things interesting and not all of us say the same thing. Every game I've seen today, except for one, really had no specific Indian theme. There was no game in Hindi. There was no game that was referencing Indian culture. The game I just played outside after my last panel was a car game that you helped get cars across bridges. So that said, you got to localize, right? You have to have the right language, the right creative style, right? Taking a game from Japan to the US, you have to have very specific creatives built. But I don't think there's necessarily has to be such a region specific for most games. That said, if it is Bollywood oriented, cricket oriented, very, very culturally sensitive, then yes, of course. But with that said, if it is the car game that I just saw up front, which was a pretty cool mechanic, he could test it in the Philippines, he could test it in LATAM, he could test it in the Middle East. It really doesn't matter, right? So unless your game is built in Hindi, Urdu, something like this, you can try it in a lot of different places.
Actually, not much of a contrarian, actually, because I actually agree with that. I think one of the most powerful things that everyone here, I'm sorry about that. I know you're actually.
Yeah, I was cuddling up. I was happy.
No, one of the most interesting things is that one of the most powerful things that everyone in this room has is the fact that you're here and your market can be anywhere else you want it to be. And a lot of what drives a lot of the success is it's actually cascading. If you see higher CPMs in another market, you should go there. You're right here. Your bits are flowing into Google Play Store and App Store, and it's available for anyone else to download. I mean, it's a huge opportunity. No doubt, there's opportunity in localized kind of cultural things that work really well here. But for the large majority of you, you have an opportunity to push something up to the App Store, check a box for a market that you know is going to be lucrative because the CPMs are right there, and then capitalize on that. The same users can be over here, might have an ARPDAU that's not conducive, whereas if you built for the US or Canadian, the UK, or other English-speaking countries that are out there, you have a really big opportunity. And the kind of the auxiliary thought to that is that, again, it really comes down to how you're going to monetize. Because yeah, it's great to see downloads, it's great to see those big numbers, but there's lots of companies that have tons of downloads and make $0. They make very little money. And so take advantage of the fact that this is the reverse this is people think of globalization. This is the reverse opportunity. This is an opportunity for you to build games that anybody anywhere can actually play and you can earn and you can monetize.
A quick note on that, but just 2 seconds. A lot of people we see, they use rankings in other countries to push up in other countries, right? So you put in your App Store page, #1 in Malaysia, right? The game wasn't built for Malaysia, but now you're marketing in the US. Anytime you see that type of ranking, right, that type of number, it doesn't really matter what country it is so much. It's just like, oh, it was really good there. I should check it out too.
I think the analytics are actually very critical. I think we talked about South Asia or Southeast Asia and all that, but you would see that the adoption rates have some kind of parallels between a few countries. Like, for example, India and Indonesia do very similar, but Philippines and India will not do the same. Philippines is far more closer to how the US adopts things. So those adoption rates and how they work can sort of help you like understand where to go, right?
Okay, now I'm going to address a big pain point for a lot of the developers who I've met in the conference, and that's the fact that they don't have a digital marketing person in their team. And that's because they have lots of things to do. They have to build a game, they have to launch it, and they don't have a person who understands the UA landscape or understands what to do. So do you guys make it easier, in terms of their life, easy in the sense that they can, instead of a managed services, is there like a check in the box kind of a thing which these guys can just go in and use some tools and stuff, which is not too complicated? Because for most of them, they wouldn't have a dedicated person to do that, right? Even at a limited budget. So I'll just go across and check, is there any flexibility that you guys offer for some of these guys to get started without actually having in-house expert in the company?
Our goal is to make it as hard as possible.
Well,
I want you guys to suffer.
Well, what was the show of hands in terms of how many people are using analytics again? Who's using analytics in their games right now? Who's using analytics? Okay, and again, and who's using Google Analytics amongst that lot? Keep your hands up if you're using Google Analytics. Okay, yeah, I just again, analytics is how you're going to be able to stay true to how which users are working and actually monetizing for you. And then tune your budgets. And it's amazing how much these self-serve interfaces allow you to go out there and do everything yourself. You drop an analytics tool in, you set your events you want to track, you're aiming for the funnel, which what you want the user to do within your game, and you go out there and you buy. If we're a big company now, but if I were starting alone and doing this again, I'd build a game, preferably on Corona Labs, and then I would put my analytics in, and I would start tracking all the events, and I would go there and I'd buy a little bit somewhere, and that would be my own decision. I'm saying you would actually see success there at scale, but you would learn a little bit about where your users are going, and then you can decide whether or not and then you can iterate over time, and then get to a point where you have a cycle that works for you, in terms of learning from your users, and then applying that to your learning from your users, updating your game, and then getting to a point where that you're going to see success in terms of a virtuous cycle versus a vicious cycle, where you're just spending money thinking you're actually seeing installs, and those users are not sticking, they're not sticking around, and then crank up your budget. So the point being that you can do it yourself. You don't need a marketing person at the very beginning to go make things work. I think there is value in having a marketing department, because as you go out there, you test more areas. You need somebody to go out there and make sure you're not spending foolishly in the wrong places, because there are many pitfalls in terms of ending up in the wrong place, because offers are getting rebrokered and 5 times over, and you don't know whether or not you're really buying from that place versus someone who's rebrokering an offer or not. So,
if everybody agrees that analytics is like the right tool to have, I think I've seen, and I know our company supports sort of startup programs where you probably get it for like 6 months or 1 year, where you don't have to pay for anything, and maybe after that you can have a pay-as-you-go kind of a program. So those kind of programs will really help a lot of developers, and I think that's probably the way to go for most of them.
One of our competitors in Japan actually offers free tracking, so detriment to my budget, but use the free stuff, man. And honestly, it's not a sprint. I know we all want to go fast. Everyone's like, I gotta get there. You hear all these stories about everyone hitting it rich in 9 months, but that's just what's in the news. The vast majority of people, it's 8 months, it's 9 months. A friend of mine, they just were acquired by Microsoft. They were around for 8 years. Just put it in perspective, all right? It's incremental approaches. It's taking the time to understand your users, test slowly, use the free stuff, call on my competitor, get their free tracking SDK in there, get their free analytics. Then maybe you get someone who's an intern, right? People who are hungry. You ask them, hey, I can't give you money, but I can give you experience, right? Which is a huge leg up for them because all these people who aren't in the industry now, you give them 6 months as an intern, they basically just punch their ticket for a career. So that's worth quite a bit, and they're probably pretty good with numbers, right? Better than me. So use those things, and then you go.
Pretty much covered a lot of the points, but yeah, we do offer a self-serve tool for people who don't want like a large managed account, etc. So yeah, self-serve tools, and along with that, for us, we pretty much work with all the tracking partners that we mentioned earlier, right? AppsFlyer, AppsFlyer, Tune, Kochava, everybody. So we have some promotional offers also that we run for young companies, new developers with some of these tracking partners, just to help out the new guys.
Awesome. So you know whom to reach out to now, after this panel, in case you need some self-serve help and without too much of a budget. So we have like a minute or two left. Any questions which the audience wants to ask the panel?
We covered it all.
I think we did a pretty good job.
You're welcome. Wow.
Okay, all awesome. I think, let's have a big round of applause for these guys. And Jake, if you want to come up and we'll wrap up the track for the day.
Cool. So thanks everyone that's come in and watched the talk, which is all of you because you've been here for the whole panel. So good.